The transport ship shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace, and Maya Chen pressed her face against the small porthole to get her first glimpse of the Galactic Defense Academy. The massive space station hung like a gleaming metal flower against the backdrop of 3 purple suns, its rotating sections spinning slowly to create artificial gravity. After 18 years on Earth, she still couldn't believe she was here. "Look at that tiny human," a deep voice rumbled behind her. Maya turned to see a Krillian cadet, easily 3 times her size, looking down at her with what might have been amusement. His rocky, crystalline skin caught the light from the viewport, creating rainbow patterns across his chest. "Are you sure you're in the right place, little one?" Maya's cheeks burned, but she managed a small nod. She'd heard comments like this for the past 3 days of travel. Out of the 200 new cadets on the transport, she was one of only 5 humans. The others were from species that had been part of the Galactic Defense Force for centuries. Krillians with their stone-like strength, Veltar with their lightning-fast reflexes, Zephyrians who could fly through space without suits, and dozens of others. Humans had only joined the galactic community 5 years ago, and they were still considered the weakest member species. "I'm sure," Maya said quietly, clutching her single bag closer to her chest. The Krillian's mandibles clicked in what she thought might be laughter before he moved away to rejoin his cluster of friends. The docking process took another hour, and Maya spent most of it trying to calm her nerves. Her mother's last words echoed in her mind. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone, sweetheart. Just do your best." But Maya knew that wasn't true. Every human who made it into the academy was representing their entire species. Earth's reputation depended on how well they performed. The airlock finally opened with a sharp hiss, and the cadets began filing out into the station proper. Maya found herself swept along in a river of beings, some walking, some slithering, some floating in small personal gravity fields. The main reception hall was enormous, with a domed ceiling that showed a real-time view of the space around them. Stars wheeled slowly overhead as the station rotated. New cadets, form ranks by species. The voice came from a Veltar instructor whose blue-scaled hide marked her as a senior officer. Her 4 arms gestured sharply, and the mass of new arrivals began to separate into groups. Maya looked around for the other humans and spotted them near the far wall. 3 males and 1 other female, all of them looking as lost as she felt. As she made her way over to them, Maya caught fragments of conversation from the other species groups. The Krillians were discussing battle formations. A cluster of Threnodi were debating weapons technology with voices like musical chimes. The Veltar were already practicing combat stances, their movements almost too fast to follow. "You must be Maya," said one of the human males when she reached their small group. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of confidence that came from being good at everything. "I'm Marcus Williams. This is Sarah, James, and David." He gestured to the others. Sarah gave her a nervous smile, while James and David just nodded. "How do you know my name?" Maya asked. "There's only 5 of us," Marcus said with a grin. "I made it my business to learn about the competition. You're from the North American Federation. Top of your class in physical fitness and tactical theory. Not bad for someone so." He paused, looking her up and down. Small. Maya felt her face heat up again. At barely 5 feet tall and weighing maybe 100 pounds soaking wet, she knew she didn't look like much next to beings that could bench press shuttles. But her size had advantages too. Advantages that no one seemed to understand. "Attention, cadets," the Veltar instructor's voice cut through the chatter. "I am Senior Instructor Velthara, and for the next 4 years, your pathetic lives belong to me. You are here because your species believe you represent their finest young warriors. I am here to prove them wrong." A ripple of nervous energy went through the assembled cadets. Velthara's 4 eyes swept over them like targeting systems. "The Academy has been training the galaxy's defenders for over 800 years, she continued. In that time, exactly 3% of cadets have graduated with full honors. Another 12% graduate with standard certification. The rest either drop out or die." She paused to let that sink in. "The mortality rate has been climbing steadily as the threats to our civilization grow more severe." Maya felt Sarah grab her arm. The other human girl's hand was shaking. Your first year will focus on basic survival, combat fundamentals, and strategic thinking, Velthara went on. Those of you who survive will move on to specialized training, those who don't. She made a gesture that was probably a shrug, though it was hard to tell with 4 arms. Your transport ships are still docked if you wish to go home now. No one moved. Maya wasn't sure if it was courage or just shock that kept them all in place. Excellent. Your room assignments are being uploaded to your personal devices now. You have 2 hours to settle in before evening formation. I suggest you use that time to say whatever prayers your species favors, because tomorrow, the real work begins. Maya's wrist comm chirped with the room assignment. Level 12, Section C, Room 47. She was relieved to see that Sarah was her roommate. At least, she'd have another human to talk to. The journey to their room took them through a maze of corridors that seemed designed to confuse new cadets. They passed training rooms where advanced students were practicing with weapons that looked like they could carve through starship hulls. Laboratories where beings in protective suits worked with substances that glowed ominously, and observation decks that showed the vast emptiness of space. This place is incredible, Sarah whispered as they finally found their corridor. And terrifying. Yeah, Maya agreed, though privately she was more excited than scared. Every room they'd passed had shown her something new, some challenge she'd never encountered before. Her whole life, she'd been the best at everything in her small town, then her state, then her country. But here, surrounded by beings who could probably tear her in half without breaking a sweat, she finally felt like she was in the right place. Their room was small but functional, with 2 bunks, 2 desks, and a shared bathroom. A large viewport showed the slow rotation of stars outside. Sarah immediately collapsed on the lower bunk and pulled out her comm to record a message for her family. Maya unpacked more slowly, thinking about the months of preparation that had led her here. The physical training had been brutal, running until she collapsed, lifting weights until her muscles screamed, learning to fight with weapons and without. The academic side had been even harder. Galactic history, xenobiology, stellar navigation, weapons technology, tactical analysis. She'd studied 16 hours a day for 2 years straight, but it was the psychological evaluation that had nearly broken her. Hour after hour of tests designed to measure everything from her ability to handle stress to her willingness to sacrifice herself for others. The evaluators had seemed surprised by some of her answers, though they'd never explained why. Maya? Sarah's voice interrupted her thoughts. Do you really think we can do this? Maya looked at her roommate, a girl from the European Union who'd scored in the top 1% on every test Earth had given her, and saw her own doubts reflected back. They were so far from home, surrounded by beings that evolution had designed to be perfect warriors. What hope did 2 humans really have? I think we have to try, Maya said finally. We're here, right? That has to count for something. Before Sarah could respond, an alarm chimed throughout the station. All first-year cadets report to Training Bay Alpha for evening formation. Came an announcement. Repeat, all first-year cadets to Training Bay Alpha. They joined the stream of new cadets, making their way through the corridors. Maya found herself walking next to a being she didn't recognize, humanoid but with silver skin that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal. First day? The being asked in a voice like wind chimes. Is it that obvious? Maya replied. The terror radiating from your group is quite distinctive. The being's features reformed into what might have been a smile. I am Zeeks Andra, of the Shapeling Collective. You may call me Zeeks. Maya Chen, from Earth. Nice to meet you. Zix's head tilted in a motion that was probably curiosity. Ah, one of the humans. We have heard much about your species since you joined the galactic community. Very unpredictable. That's one way to put it, Maya said with a small laugh. Training Bay Alpha turned out to be an enormous space that could have held a small city. Obstacle courses, weapon ranges, and sparring areas filled the floor, while elevated platforms around the walls provided viewing areas. The cadets formed up in rough lines facing a raised platform where several instructors waited. Senior instructor Velthara stepped forward again, her blue scales gleaming under the harsh lights. Welcome to your new home, she said. For the next 4 years, you will eat, sleep, and breathe combat. Some of you are here because your species values honor and glory. Others seek to protect their worlds from the growing darkness beyond our borders. And a few. Her eyes seemed to focus directly on Maya for a moment. Are here for reasons they don't yet understand themselves. Maya felt a chill run down her spine. What did that mean? Your first exercise begins now, Velthara continued. A simple test of basic capabilities. Each of you will attempt to complete the obstacle course behind me. Your time and technique will be recorded and analyzed. Consider this your first academy evaluation. The obstacle course looked like something designed by someone who hated fun. It started with a 30-foot rope climb, moved through a series of balance beams over what looked like an electrified pit, included several walls to scale and barriers to crawl under, and ended with a sprint through a maze of moving platforms. The Krillians went first, their massive forms making the rope climb look easy but struggling with the balance portions. The Veltar were lightning fast but had trouble with obstacles that required brute strength. Each species seemed to excel in some areas while struggling in others. When they called the humans forward, Maya felt every eye in the bay focus on their little group. Marcus went first, attacking the course with the same confidence he'd shown earlier. He did well enough, not the fastest time, but respectable. Sarah was next, and she managed to complete it despite obvious fear. James and David both finished in the middle of the pack. Maya Chen, Velthara called. Maya stepped forward, her heart hammering in her chest. Around her, she could hear whispered conversations in a dozen languages, but she caught enough to know what they were saying. The smallest cadet, the weakest species. This should be entertaining. She approached the rope and looked up its length. 30 feet had seemed like nothing during training on Earth, but somehow it looked impossibly high now. Behind her, someone made a comment in Krillian that caused rumbling laughter. Maya took a deep breath, grabbed the rope, and began to climb. The first surprise was her speed. Years of training had given her a strength-to-weight ratio that was actually better than most of the larger species. She shot up the rope like it was a ladder, reaching the top in 12 seconds, faster than anyone else had managed. The balance beams were next. Here, her small size and low center of gravity were advantages. While others had wobbled and struggled to maintain stability, Maya practically danced across the narrow surfaces, her movements precise and controlled. The walls presented more of a challenge. They were clearly designed for larger beings, with handholds spaced for longer reaches. But Maya had trained for this too. Instead of trying to use the holds as intended, she found her own path, using cracks and seams that others couldn't see. Moving like a spider across surfaces that should have been impossible to climb. By the time she reached the final sprint section, the training bay had gone completely silent. The moving platforms required split-second timing and perfect spatial awareness. Maya had studied their pattern while waiting for her turn, and now she moved through them without hesitation, her small frame slipping through gaps that others had to fight their way past. She crossed the finish line and looked up at the timer display. Her time was nearly 30 seconds faster than the previous best, set by a Veltar cadet who was supposedly one of the fastest beings in known space. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Then senior instructor Velthara's mandibles clicked in what Maya was beginning to recognize as approval. Interesting, the instructor said. It seems Earth produces more surprises than we expected. Maya made her way back to the other humans, trying to ignore the stares from every direction. Marcus was looking at her like he'd never seen her before. Where did that come from? He asked quietly. I've been training, Maya said, which was true enough. She just hadn't mentioned that she'd been training specifically for environments and challenges that wouldn't exist on Earth. Her access to classified Galactic Academy information might have been technically illegal, but her father's position in Earth's diplomatic corps had its advantages. As the evening wore on, they went through several more basic exercises. Combat drills, tactical puzzles, survival scenarios. In each one, Maya performed well, not always the best, but consistently in the top tier. More importantly, she was learning things about her fellow cadets that they probably didn't even realize they were revealing. The Krillians were incredibly strong but had slower reaction times. The Veltar were fast but relied too heavily on predetermined patterns. The Threnodi were brilliant tacticians but struggled with improvisation. Every species had its strengths and weaknesses, its blind spots and vulnerabilities. When they were finally dismissed, Maya was exhausted but exhilarated. She'd made it through the first day. More than that, she'd proven she belonged here. As she and Sarah made their way back to their room, Maya caught sight of a group of upperclassmen, watching them from an observation deck. One of them, a tall being with features she couldn't quite make out, seemed to be taking particular interest in her. When their eyes met, the being nodded once before turning away. "Who was that?" Sarah asked, noticing Maya's distraction. "I have no idea," Maya said. "But I get the feeling we haven't seen the last of them." That night, as she lay in her bunk listening to the quiet hum of the station's life support systems, Maya thought about her father's words when she'd left Earth. "The galaxy is watching us, Maya. Everything we do reflects on our entire species, but don't let that pressure crush you. Sometimes the smallest person can cast the largest shadow." She'd thought she understood what he meant at the time. Now, surrounded by beings who could literally crush her without effort, she was beginning to suspect there was more to his words than she'd realized. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove herself. Maya Chen closed her eyes and began to plan. 3 weeks into academy life, Maya had settled into a routine that would have killed her back on Earth. Every day began at 0500 hours with physical conditioning, followed by weapons training, tactical studies, xenobiology, and advanced combat simulations. The days were 18 hours long on the academy's schedule, leaving just enough time for meals and a few hours of sleep. She was adapting faster than most of her fellow humans. Marcus was struggling with the academic load, while Sarah had been sent to the medical bay twice after combat training sessions. James had already talked about dropping out, and David spent most of his free time in communications bays, sending increasingly desperate messages home. Maya, on the other hand, felt like she was finally where she belonged. "Chen, you're up," called Instructor Throckmore, a massive draconian whose scales shifted from black to deep purple depending on his mood. Currently, they were a warning shade of crimson. "Let's see how humans handle real combat scenarios." The Advanced Combat Simulator was a room that could recreate any environment and populate it with holographic enemies that felt as real as anything else. Maya had been watching other cadets go through their scenarios all morning, and none of them had lasted more than 10 minutes. The Krillian cadet who'd gone before her had faced a simulation of urban warfare on a colony world. Despite his natural armor and devastating strength, he'd been overwhelmed by enemy numbers within 8 minutes. The simulation had ended with his character bleeding out in a bombed-out building, while enemy forces closed in around him. "What scenario would you like, cadet?" Throckmore's voice rumbled like distant thunder. "Standard assault course? Survival scenario? Perhaps something designed for your physical limitations?" Maya could hear the condescension in his tone. Over the past weeks, she'd noticed that several of the instructors seemed to view humans as a curiosity at best, a liability at worst. They gave her easier assignments, lower expectations, and seemed surprised when she exceeded them. "Whatever the standard test is for fourth-year cadets," Maya said quietly. A ripple of surprise went through the observation area where her classmates were watching. The standard fourth-year scenario was designed for cadets who'd had 3.5 years of intensive training. First years weren't supposed to even attempt it. Throckmore's scales shifted to an amused orange. "Very well. If you insist on failing spectacularly, who am I to stop you?" He input commands into his control panel. "Scenario 7 Alpha. Hostile boarding action aboard a capital ship. Your objective is to reach the bridge and prevent the enemy from accessing the navigation computers. You have 20 minutes. The room around Maya shifted and blurred, then reformed into the cramped corridors of a battleship under attack. Emergency lights flashed red, and she could hear the distant sounds of weapons, fire, and explosions. Her gear consisted of standard cadet armor, a pulse rifle, a sidearm, and basic medical supplies. She'd studied this scenario in her tactical courses. In theory, it was straightforward. Fight your way through enemy-controlled sections of a ship to reach a specific objective. In practice, it was designed to test everything a cadet had learned about close-quarters combat, tactical thinking, and resource management. Maya took a moment to orient herself, then began moving through the ship. The first challenge came quickly, a squad of holographic enemy soldiers holding a choke point at a junction of 3 corridors. The standard approach would be to use superior firepower to overwhelm them, but Maya's weapons weren't powerful enough for a frontal assault. Instead, she backtracked and found an access hatch that led into the ship's maintenance systems. The crawlways were too small for most species, but Maya slipped through them easily, emerging behind the enemy position. Rather than attacking immediately, she studied their patrol patterns and communication methods. What she discovered was interesting. The holographic enemies were operating under standard military doctrine. Predictable. By-the-book tactics that prioritized holding position over adapting to changing circumstances. Maya spent 5 precious minutes learning their patterns, then struck. She didn't try to fight them directly. Instead, she sabotaged their equipment, sealed off their escape routes, and then triggered a distraction that pulled them away from their position. By the time they realized what had happened, she was already 2 sections closer to her objective. The next challenge was more complex, a heavily fortified engineering section where the enemy had set up automated defenses. Turrets tracked movement in the main corridors, and force fields blocked alternative routes. Several previous cadets had lost their simulated lives trying to rush through this section. Maya approached it differently. Instead of trying to overcome the defenses, she studied them until she understood their programming. Then, she used the ship's own systems against them, rerouting power flows and triggering maintenance protocols that caused the defenses to shut down temporarily. It took longer than a brute force approach, but she passed through without taking a single hit. By the 15th minute, she'd reached the outer sections of the bridge area. Here, the enemy had their strongest positions, elite troops with heavy weapons and full tactical support. This was where most cadets failed. Overwhelmed by superior numbers and firepower, Maya crouched in a maintenance shaft, studying the enemy positions through a sensor feed she'd tapped into. There were 12 hostiles between her and the navigation computer, all of them positioned to cover the obvious approach routes. A frontal assault would be suicide. But Maya wasn't thinking about frontal assaults. She was thinking about the fundamental assumptions the enemy was making. They expected her to come from the main corridors. They expected her to fight like a soldier. They expected her to play by the rules. Maya smiled and began to move. Instead of heading for the bridge, she went deeper into the ship's systems, following maintenance conduits and service corridors that most beings couldn't access. She bypassed the enemy positions entirely, emerging in the bridge's secondary computer core, a backup facility that could access the same navigation systems as the main console. The room was unguarded. Why would the enemy waste troops protecting a secondary system when they controlled all the approaches to the primary one? Maya connected to the navigation computer and began her work. She didn't just prevent the enemy from accessing it, she turned it against them, using the ship's internal sensors to map their positions, and then triggering environmental systems to create chaos in their ranks. Lights went out, gravity fluctuated, and atmospheric processors began venting smoke into their positions. When the simulation ended 18 minutes and 37 seconds after it began, Maya was sitting calmly in the secondary computer core, having completed her objective with time to spare. The simulation room reformed around her, and she found herself facing an observation area full of stunned silence. Instructor Throckmore was staring at his displays like they were showing him impossible readings. "That's not how that scenario is supposed to work," he muttered. "Did I fail?" Maya asked, though she was pretty sure she hadn't. "Fail?" Throckmore's scales had shifted to a color she'd never seen before, a swirling mixture of purple and gold. "Cadet? You just completed a 4th-year scenario faster than any cadet in Academy history. And you did it using methods that aren't in any tactical manual." Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks. Around her, the other cadets were whispering in their various languages, and she caught enough to know they were talking about her. Some sounded impressed, others sounded confused, a few sounded suspicious. "How did you know about the secondary computer core?" asked one of the upperclassmen who'd been observing. He was a Veltar, with the dark blue scales that marked him as a senior cadet. That information isn't included in the scenario briefing. I studied the ship schematics, Maya said simply. All capital ships have redundant systems. It seemed logical that there would be backup access points. The schematics for that class of ship are classified, the Veltar said, his four eyes narrowing. How exactly did you access classified information? Maya felt the room's attention focus on her like a targeting system. She'd walked into a trap without realizing it. Her father's diplomatic access had let her study far more than most cadets ever saw, but she couldn't exactly explain that without admitting to what might technically be a violation of Academy rules. I read a lot, she said finally. Earth's database includes a lot of technical information that other species consider restricted. It wasn't exactly a lie. Earth's rapid integration into galactic society had resulted in some unusual information-sharing agreements, and Maya had made the most of them, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Instructor Thakmor saved her from further questions by calling the next cadet forward, but Maya could feel eyes on her as she left the simulator. She was starting to understand that performing well here wasn't just about physical ability or tactical knowledge. It was about politics, perception, and the complex relationships between species that had been part of galactic civilization for centuries. At lunch, she sat with the other humans as usual, but the conversation felt different. Marcus was looking at her like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve. Seriously, Maya, he said quietly. Where is this stuff coming from? You're outperforming cadets who've been training for this their whole lives. I told you, I've been training too, Maya said, picking at her food. The Academy's nutrition systems were designed to meet the needs of dozens of different species, and the result was meals that were technically perfect, but tasted like nothing she recognized. Training for what? Sarah asked. There's no way Earth has facilities that can replicate what we're doing here. Maya was saved from answering by the arrival of someone she didn't expect, Zixandra, the shapeling she'd met on her first day. The silver-skinned being slid into the seat across from her with fluid grace. Mind if I join you? Zix asked, though they were already sitting down. I wanted to discuss your performance in the simulator today. Sure, Maya said cautiously. What about it? Maya said, you approached the scenario in a way that no one here has seen before. Zeke said, their features shifting slightly as they spoke. The instructors are intrigued. Intrigued how? Zix's form stabilized into something almost human-like, but with silver skin that seemed to flow like water. There are theories about your species, they said quietly. Some believe humans are just another warrior race with delusions of grandeur. Others think you're potentially dangerous because you're unpredictable, but a few believe you're something entirely new. New how? Marcus asked, leaning forward. Most species develop their military doctrine over thousands of years, Zix explained. They learn what works, codify it into training programs, and pass it down through generations. It creates powerful traditions, but also rigid thinking. Humans don't have those traditions yet. You're still improvising. Maya felt a chill run down her spine. Is that good or bad? That depends, Zeke said with what might have been a smile. On what you do with the freedom. Zeke's. Before anyone could respond, an announcement echoed through the dining hall. All first-year cadets report to Briefing Room 7 immediately. All first-year cadets to Briefing Room 7. The dining hall erupted in conversation as 200 cadets began speculating about what could require an emergency briefing. Maya followed the crowd, but she noticed that several upperclassmen were watching the first years with expressions that looked almost sympathetic. Briefing Room 7 was a theater-style space with a massive holographic display at the front. Senior instructor Velthara was waiting for them, along with several other instructors Maya didn't recognize. Their expressions were grim. Cadets, Velthara began once everyone was seated. Your training schedule is about to change dramatically. 3 days ago, long-range sensors detected an unknown fleet moving through the Outer Rim territories. They've attacked and destroyed 2 research stations, and are heading toward populated systems. The holographic display showed star maps with red markers indicating the attack sites. Maya studied the pattern and felt her blood run cold. She'd seen similar patterns in her tactical studies, classic deep strike tactics designed to test defensive responses before a major assault. Under normal circumstances, first-year cadets would not be involved in active operations, Velthara continued. However, these are not normal circumstances. Fleet Command has ordered all Academy classes to accelerate their training programs. You now have 6 weeks to prepare for operational deployment. A murmur of shock ran through the assembled cadets. 6 weeks instead of 4 years. It should have been impossible. Your final examinations will consist of a series of live exercises designed to simulate real combat conditions, Velthara announced. The top performers will be assigned to active duty squadrons. The rest will be reassigned to support roles or sent home. Maya felt her heart racing. This was what she'd been preparing for her entire life, but 6 weeks seemed impossibly short. Around her, other cadets were expressing similar concerns in a dozen different languages. I know this seems overwhelming, Velthara said, her voice cutting through the noise. But remember, you are here because you represent the best your species have to offer. The galaxy is depending on you to rise to this challenge. The briefing continued for another hour, covering the details of their accelerated training program. Combat exercises every day, advanced tactical simulations, weapons systems they'd normally not touch until their 3rd year. It was going to be brutal. As they filed out of the briefing room, Maya found herself walking next to a cadet she hadn't spoken to before. A tall, insectoid being with 4 arms and compound eyes that seemed to see everything at once. She thought they might be Zendari, but she wasn't sure. This acceleration benefits some species more than others, the being said in a voice like rustling leaves. Those with natural combat instincts will adapt quickly. Others will struggle. Which category do you think humans fall into? Maya asked. The being's head tilted in a way that might have been amusement. That remains to be seen. Your performance today suggests possibilities that most had not considered. Before Maya could ask what that meant, the being had moved away, leaving her with more questions than answers. That night, as she lay in her bunk reviewing the day's lessons, Maya thought about everything that had happened. Her performance in the simulator had clearly marked her as someone to watch. But she wasn't sure if that was good or bad. The acceleration of the training program changed everything. There would be no time to gradually build her reputation. In 6 weeks, she would either prove herself worthy of serving alongside the galaxy's defenders, or she would be sent home in failure. But there was something else bothering her. Something that had been nagging at the edge of her consciousness since the briefing. The attack pattern they'd shown, the timing of the Academy's response, the way certain instructors had looked when discussing the threat. It all felt too convenient, too perfectly designed to test the Academy's new training methods. Maya had spent her whole life studying patterns, looking for the hidden connections that others missed. And this pattern was starting to look very familiar. She pulled up her personal comm and began researching everything she could find about the mysterious attacking fleet. If her suspicions were correct, the next 6 weeks weren't just going to test her combat abilities. They were going to test her ability to see the larger game being played around her. As she worked, Maya Chen began to suspect that her real education at the Galactic Defense Academy was just beginning. The final week of accelerated training had pushed every cadet to their absolute limits. Maya had watched dozens of her fellow students drop out, transfer to support roles, or simply collapse under the pressure. The dining halls that had once buzzed with conversation from 200 cadets now held fewer than 60. Even among the survivors, many bore the hollow-eyed look of beings who had discovered the difference between training and war. Maya felt tired in ways she'd never experienced before, but also more alive than she'd ever been. Every challenge had revealed new capabilities she hadn't known she possessed. Every simulation had shown her different ways to think about problems that seemed impossible. She was beginning to understand what her father had meant about casting large shadows. Final rankings will be posted at 1,400 hours, announced Senior Instructor Velthara as the remaining cadets assembled in Training Bay Alpha for the last time. Those ranked in the top 20 will receive immediate active duty assignments. Ranks 21 through 40 will be assigned to support squadrons with potential for advancement. The rest. She let the silence hang for a moment. Will return to their home worlds with our appreciation for their efforts. Maya tried to calculate her chances as she looked around at the survivors. The Krillian named Thokvar had dominated every strength-based challenge. Velkesh, a Veltar female, had been unbeatable in speed and reflexes. Zixandra had shown tactical brilliance that impressed even the instructors. These were the beings she'd been competing against for 6 weeks. Before the rankings are revealed, Velthera continued, you will face one final exercise. A live-fire wargame scenario that will count as 50% of your overall evaluation. The training bay began to shift and change around them as massive holographic projectors activated. When the transformation was complete, they were standing in what appeared to be a small frontier city under siege. Buildings rose around them, complete with civilians who needed protection and defensive positions that could be held or abandoned. The scenario is simple, Velthara explained. Hostile forces are advancing on this settlement. You have 4 hours to organize its defense and hold against 3 waves of attacks. You may divide into teams as you see fit, choose your own command structure, and employ whatever tactics you believe will be successful. Maya felt her heart sink. A team exercise. Throughout her training, she'd excelled in individual challenges but struggled to get other cadets to listen to her ideas during group activities. She was still seen as the small, quiet human girl who'd gotten lucky a few times. The surviving cadets began clustering into groups almost immediately. The Krillians formed a heavy assault team. The Veltar organized themselves around speed and mobility. Other species gravitated toward beings they knew and trusted. Maya found herself standing alone as the groupings solidified. The other humans, Marcus and Sarah, had made it this far, though James and David had dropped out weeks ago. Were deep in conversation with a mixed group of species. They didn't even look in her direction. It appears you need a team. Cadet Chen. Maya turned to find someone she didn't recognize, a tall figure in the dark uniform of an upperclassman, with features that seemed to shift slightly in the changing light. She realized with a start that this was the mysterious observer she'd noticed on her first day. I'm sorry, I don't think we've met, Maya said. Senior Cadet Valenier of the Strategic Command Track, the being replied. I've been watching your progress with considerable interest. I have a proposal for you. Before Maya could respond, she noticed that other cadets were staring in their direction. Valenier was clearly someone important, though she couldn't figure out why. What kind of proposal? Maya asked. Join my team, Valenier said simply. I've already recruited 2 other cadets, operative specialists who understand unconventional warfare. I believe your particular talents would complement our approach perfectly. Maya looked around at the other teams forming up. Large groups of 8 to 12 cadets, all focused on traditional military doctrine. Valenier's team would be just 4 beings total. That seems like a significant disadvantage, Maya pointed out. Numbers are only an advantage if you're fighting the kind of battle your enemies expect, Valenier replied. I don't believe in giving enemies what they expect. Something in the way he said it reminded Maya of her own approach to the combat simulations. She realized this might be exactly the opportunity she'd been waiting for. All right, she said. I'm in. Valenier's team turned out to be unlike anything Maya had encountered at the academy. Besides herself and Valenier, there was Kethara, a shadow walker from a species she'd never heard of who could become nearly invisible, and Jix, a small crystalline being who interfaced directly with computer systems. They were all specialists in unconventional warfare, and they treated Maya as an equal partner from the first moment. Standard doctrine says to hold the perimeter and fall back to stronger positions under pressure, Valenier explained as they studied the holographic city around them. Every other team will set up defensive lines and wait for the enemy to come to them. That won't work, Maya said, studying the terrain. The city's too big to defend effectively with the forces available. The enemy will just concentrate their attacks on weak points and overwhelm individual positions. Exactly, Valenier said with approval. So what do you suggest? Maya spent several minutes walking through the simulation, examining buildings, streets, and defensive positions. As she moved, she began to see patterns that others had missed. The city wasn't just a random collection of buildings, it was a system, with infrastructure and vulnerable points that could be turned to their advantage. "We don't defend the city," Maya said finally. "We turn it into a weapon." Over the next hour, Maya's team prepared for the assault in ways that would have seemed impossible to outside observers. Instead of setting up defensive positions, they rigged buildings to collapse in specific patterns. Instead of protecting infrastructure, they prepared to weaponize it. Instead of organizing civilians for evacuation, they created a network of observers who could provide real-time intelligence. When the first enemy wave arrived, it found an apparently undefended city. The other cadet teams, watching from their own defensive positions, began speculating about whether Maya's team had simply failed to prepare adequately. The enemy forces, sophisticated holographic constructs programmed with advanced tactical AI, moved into the city, expecting resistance. Instead, they found empty streets and abandoned buildings. They advanced cautiously, searching for the defenders they knew had to be there somewhere. Maya's team struck when half the enemy force was committed to the urban area. But instead of attacking the soldiers directly, they attacked the city itself. Buildings collapsed in carefully planned sequences, creating choke points and traps. Infrastructure failures caused cascading effects that disrupted enemy communications and movements. And through it all, the four-member team moved like ghosts, striking at key targets and disappearing before the enemy could respond. The first wave was eliminated without Maya's team firing more than a dozen shots. The second wave was larger and more cautious, but Maya had spent the interim preparing even more elaborate surprises. She'd turned the entire city into a maze of traps, diversions, and killing fields that channeled the enemy exactly where she wanted them. By the time they realized what was happening, it was too late. The third wave never made it into the city at all. Maya had used the break between attacks to extend her preparations to the approaches, creating a network of obstacles and hazards that turned the enemy's advance into a chaotic retreat. When the exercise ended, the training bay fell completely silent. Maya's team had achieved something that shouldn't have been possible. A complete victory with zero casualties and minimal resource expenditure. "That was not a conventional defense," Senior Instructor Velthera observed, her scales showing colors Maya had never seen before. "No, ma'am, it wasn't," Maya agreed, "but it was effective." "Effective," repeated another instructor. A draconian whose purple scales were nearly black with what might have been awe. "Cadet Chen, you just demonstrated tactical innovation that would be impressive coming from a senior staff officer. How did you develop these methods?" Maya looked around at the assembled instructors and cadets, all staring at her with expressions ranging from amazement to confusion to something that might have been fear. She realized this was the moment when everything she'd been hiding would come out. "I studied human history," she said simply. "Earth has been fighting wars for thousands of years, usually against enemies with superior numbers or technology. We got good at making up for disadvantages through unconventional thinking. Human history is not part of the academy curriculum," Velthara pointed out. "No, ma'am," Maya agreed, "but it probably should be. At exactly 1,400 hours, as promised, the final rankings appeared on displays throughout the academy. Maya stood with the other surviving cadets in Training Bay Alpha, watching the holographic numbers materialize in the air above them. The list started at the bottom and worked its way up. Rank 60. A Threnody cadet, who'd shown promise in logistics. Rank 59. One of the Krillians who dominated early physical challenges but struggled with advanced tactics. Rank 40. Marcus Williams, ranked as promising officer material with room for improvement. Maya watched the numbers climb, seeing beings she'd trained alongside for weeks, fought beside in simulations, shared meals with in the dining halls. Each name represented someone who'd pushed themselves to their absolute limits. And she felt a strange sadness knowing that most of them would be heading home. Rank 21. Sarah, barely making the cutoff for support squadron assignment. Maya felt a surge of pride for her roommate, who'd overcome her fears to make it this far. Rank 20. Thokvar, the Krillian who'd been favored by many to finish in the top 10. Rank 15. Velkesh, The Veltar speedster who'd set records in individual challenges. Rank 10. Zix Andra, whose tactical innovations had earned praise from every instructor. Rank 5. Keth Ara, the Shadow Walker from Maya's final team. Rank 3. Jix, the crystalline computer specialist. Rank 2. Valanir, whose leadership and strategic thinking had impressed everyone. Maya felt her breath catch in her throat. If Valanir was ranked second, and she wasn't seeing her own name yet. Rank 1. Cadet Maya Chen, Earth. Final evaluation. Exceptional tactical innovation. Outstanding adaptability. Superior performance in all categories. Recommended for immediate assignment to Strategic Command Advanced Operations. The training bay erupted in chaos. Voices in dozens of languages expressed shock, disbelief, and confusion. Maya stood frozen, staring at her name at the top of the list, unable to process what she was seeing. She was number 1. Out of 200 cadets representing the finest young warriors from dozens of species. She, a small, quiet human girl who everyone had underestimated, had finished first. This has to be a mistake, someone said loudly. Maya turned to see one of the surviving Krillians, his crystalline features twisted with anger. How can a human rank above beings who've been training for combat their entire lives? Because, came a new voice from the entrance to the training bay. She thinks like no one else here. Maya turned to see a figure in the silver uniform of Fleet Command approaching. The being was clearly important. Every instructor in the bay immediately came to attention. Maya recognized the uniform insignia of a strategic admiral, one of the highest ranks in the Galactic Defense Force. Admiral Kex Thera, Senior Instructor Vel Thera said, snapping a crisp salute. We weren't expecting a command inspection. I came to see the results of your accelerated program personally, the Admiral replied. Her species was unfamiliar to Maya, with flowing features that seemed to shift between solid and energy states. Particularly the performance of your top-ranked cadet. All eyes turned to Maya, who suddenly felt very small despite everything she'd accomplished. Ma'am? Cadet Chen, I've been reviewing your performance records since your arrival at the Academy, Admiral Kex Thera said. Your tactical innovations, your unconventional problem-solving methods, your ability to see solutions that others miss. Do you know why these abilities are so valuable? No, ma'am, Maya admitted. Because for 800 years, this academy has trained brilliant warriors who think in predictable patterns, the Admiral explained. They learn doctrine, master techniques, and become incredibly effective at fighting enemies who behave according to established military theory. But the threats we face now don't follow established patterns. Maya felt pieces of a puzzle clicking together in her mind. The mysterious fleet that attacked the research stations was a test, Admiral Kex Thera confirmed. A simulation designed to see how the Academy would respond to an accelerated training schedule. But more importantly, it was designed to identify cadets who could think beyond conventional warfare. The galaxy needs defenders who can adapt to threats we can't predict or prepare for. She gestured to Maya and the other top-ranked cadets. You represent the future of galactic defense. Not because you're the strongest or the fastest, but because you can see possibilities that others miss. Maya looked around at her fellow cadets. Beings who'd initially dismissed her as weak and irrelevant, now staring at her with expressions of amazement and respect. She thought about her father's words about casting large shadows and finally understood what he'd meant. It wasn't about her size or her strength. It was about her ability to see what others couldn't, to find solutions where others saw only problems, to turn disadvantages into advantages through pure creativity and determination. What happens now? Maya asked. Now, Admiral Kex Thera said, with what might have been a smile, you help us prepare for threats that haven't been imagined yet. Your first assignment will be with the Strategic Innovation Division, working on defense scenarios for colony worlds on the Outer Rim. Your methods will be studied, adapted, and taught to a new generation of defenders. As the crowd of cadets began to disperse, many stopping to congratulate Maya or ask questions about her techniques, she found herself standing next to Valanir. I knew there was something special about you from the first day, he said. The way you moved, the way you observed everything around you. You see patterns that others miss. I just think differently, Maya said modestly. No, Valinir replied. You think like a human. And apparently, that's exactly what the galaxy needs right now. That evening, as Maya packed her belongings for transfer to her new assignment, Sarah sat on her bunk watching with a mixture of pride and sadness. I can't believe you're really number one in the entire academy, Sarah said. When we first met, I thought, well, I thought we'd both probably wash out in the first month. I thought the same thing, Maya admitted. But it turns out being small and quiet and different isn't always a disadvantage. Are you scared? About the new assignment, I mean? Maya considered the question seriously. In a few days, she'd be working alongside the galaxy's top military strategists, helping to design defenses for threats that didn't yet exist. It should have been terrifying. Instead, she felt like she was exactly where she belonged. No, Maya said finally. I'm excited. For the first time in my life, I'm going somewhere that needs exactly what I can offer. As she sealed her packing container, Maya thought about the journey that had brought her here. From a small girl in a small town on a small planet, to the top-ranked cadet in the galaxy's premier military academy. It seemed impossible, but the evidence was right there in the rankings. Maya Chen closed her eyes and began to plan for tomorrow. There would be new challenges, new problems that needed unconventional solutions, new ways to turn human creativity and adaptability into advantages for galactic civilization. She couldn't wait to get started.